match the pins that I just put into my backing onto my top, or onto my leader. And you're gonna notice I'm pinning to a zipper because I have a zipper system installed on my machine, but it would be the same if I was doing it straight to the leader. You would be using the center of your leader instead of the center of the zipper at that point. And for most people, those would be the same point, but my loading zipper is actually longer than my leader. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you my center of my leader is right here, and this is the center of the zipper. To make it easier, I'm just going to use the center of the zipper. The center of the zipper will be in the same point on both the front and back of the machine, just like this will be at the same point. When we go up front, you're going to notice that it's over too. It's fine. You don't always have to load straight to the center. You just need to be in the same point on the front and the back. Okay, so I'm going to pin these on, and I'm going to use big stitches with my pins and keep my pins about a finger width apart. And I'm going to pin all the way down to the end of the backing. You're going to pin from the center out in both directions. You can see that I've pinned all of my pins all the way to the right edge of my backing, from the left all the way to the right. It's completely pinned on. I am right-handed, so the pearls of my pins are to the right, the points are to the left. When I get down to this left side way down here, you're gonna see I reversed the last pin. This is because I use zippers, and when I unzip the zippers, I need this pin to be going the other direction, or I will drive the tip of the pin into my finger. Okay, so I do pin one pin backwards on purpose. If you do have zippers on your machine, it saves your fingers a little bit. And it'll also save your clothes if you do that on the front of the machine. Now I'm going to drop the entire quilt down inside the throat of the, I'm going to drop it into the quiltable space. And I want to roll the majority of the quilt up onto the take-up roller. And I want to do that so that I'm not dealing with the weight of the backing. I want the frame to deal with the weight of the backing. Okay, so I want to roll this up on the take-up roller, and I'm on a Lucy on a standard frame, so I don't have a motorized feed on this. What you're going to watch me do, though, is roll it from the center of the frame because it's a little easier to do it there, and then also smooth out my leaders going both directions as I'm doing this. I want to keep my leaders nice and straight. I also want to keep the backing going on straight, so I'm going to keep smoothing that out, and I'm watching to try to get this close to where it's going to be able to zip or pin onto the front. I can always unroll it a little bit if I need to, so it's not a super big deal. Okay, that's definitely far enough. And I'm going to walk around to the front of the machine. Okay, I did not talk about this on the back of the frame, but you're going to notice that I have my leader rolled completely up and around my top roller on my machine. This is so that I keep my pinning down in this area when I drop it. So when I do it on the back, I do the same thing. I take the roller, the fabric down and roll it back around both of the rollers. It makes it easier. It means that you're not going to end up with quilt coming here instead of down here. Now I'm going to match the pin that I put in the bottom part of my backing up with my line and pin the front. Remember that when you are pinning, the wrong side of your fabric needs to be up. This is batik. It's right on both sides. But if I was not using batik, this would be the wrong side of my fabric. And I'm just going to pin the same way I did on the back. Once it's pinned, I drop it in the center, and then I'm going to roll it up onto the backing roller. And from there roll it onto the front roller. It lets me get the roll on my front roller tighter, and I don't have as many issues with the sides not being flat. So I always roll everything all the way up onto my back roller and then back it onto my front roller. So I am going to walk around the back and we're going to shoot towards me so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to roll this up onto my take-up roller and get it nice and flat on my take-up roller. And then once it's up on the take-up roller, I'm going to stop and I'm going to start reversing it the other direction. So I am going to have my hand on my backing roller and my take-up roller, and both of these are going to be off. This is for a standard frame. If I was on a deluxe frame with A motorized feed, I only have to deal with the front roller because the backing roller is locked into position and it's going to rotate whichever way I step on the button. So this is how I would do it on a standard frame. I'm going to roll it on with my left hand and keep a little bit of tension on this back roller with my right one. And see how beautiful and flat it's going on? That's the goal, a pretty flat backing.
That's all.
The next thing I want to say is I'm going to roll my leader about halfway into my quiltable space. And guys, I'm almost 6 feet tall. I still roll it halfway because reaching all the way to the back of your frame is not ergonomically correct. So roll it towards you so that when you load it, it's close to you and you're not leaning way back on your frame. Once you have the top of it sewn down, you can roll it back as far as you need to. But to start out with, give your back a break. Keep your toppings, the top of your quilt closer to you when you're loading on. This is something that my guild lovingly refers to as Franken-batting. So they've taken all of the scrap batting and they've sewn it together using a zigzag stitch. And it is a nightmare for long armors. That being said, they are trying really, really hard to use every little bit of the batting, and I'm trying really hard to support them. So what I want to point out with this is anytime you get a batting that's pieced, which this is obviously heavily pieced, I'm probably going to try this 90 degrees from this direction as well. But if for some reason I couldn't do that, there is a lot of extra batting in the center of this. So if I grab right here in the center and pull up, you're going to notice I can get this batting to hang pretty flat, right? So it's about 8 inches bigger in the center than it is on the sides. So I would want to know that up front because what I would do is then take this batting and smooth it up towards the top, right? So that it was hanging better on my frame. Let's look and see what it looks like if I do it the other direction though, because the piecing lines are predominantly the other direction on this. So if we lay this across, and I smooth it out, I still have a little bit of a problem, but it's not quite as bad this direction, so I'm probably going to quilt it in this direction. You just want to be careful, especially when people are giving you battings, and it doesn't have to be pieced. There are battings out there that are 2 different thicknesses or multiple thicknesses as they're going through their packaging, and they're going to hang funny off the front of your long arm. So if it's hanging and you can see big C curves in it like you did earlier, it is not going to quilt right. Okay, you're going to need to play with it and try to get rid of that C curve to get it to actually quilt right. So pay attention when you're putting it on. I can't show you the right and the wrong side of batting on this because, to be honest with you, this batting is going 400 different directions right now. But I will shoot another video just on batting so I can show you the right and the wrong sides of multiple types of batting so that you're aware of how to load it. Most of the time it's really, really important that you get the batting loaded the correct way on your frame. If you don't, you can get pokies, batty pokies coming through the back of your backing. In this case, we're not going to be able to be concerned with that. We have other issues to deal with our batting. When I start putting batting down on my frame, I want the top of my batting to be about 2 inches below where I actually want it to end up with at the end. We have a 2-inch roller sitting here, or a 2.5-inch roller if you're on a deluxe frame. So if you let it come down about 2 inches and you then put whatever you're trying to underneath the roller, it's going to come out the right height. So after I've smoothed my batting out and I have it about, about 2 inches lower than what I want, I'm going to slide it underneath my top roller. So when I do that, you're going to notice it hits higher, right? Because this roller had bumped the batting up a little bit. So that's how I measure it to make sure that it's going to hit about the right space when I come up. The next step is to go around to the back and set off the channel lock so that I can quilt a straight line. I'm going to put my needle about where it needs to be, and then I'm going to hit my needle down so that it's locked into position. Then I'm going to set off my channel lock. So if I'm on a milli, I'm just going to hit the channel lock that locks off in the right-left position. If I'm on a Lucy, a Freddie, or a Lenny, there is a knob right back here. So I'm going to turn it righty-tighty until it doesn't want to move back and forth. It only wants to move right and left. And I'm ready to sew my line. So I need to come back around to the front to sew the line. Okay, so I pulled my bobbin up to the top. I'm going to turn my machine on and stitch across. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the top. Put it, about 2 inches down from where I want it to be. This is the center of my top. There's my center mark on my backing. So I'm going to get them close. Unless there's something that it actually has to meet on, it doesn't have to be exact. You can have more quilting or more batting on one side of the frame than the other, or more backing on one side of the quilt than the other. Unless there's something you need to actually center, they don't have to be exactly on top of each other. I know when I first started out, people said you had to center everything. So I was really, OCD about getting everything right in the center and having it all perfect. And then over time, I learned that the most important thing was for this quilt to come off the frame square. If I need to center it, I do. I'm also going to make some notes. If this was a customer quilt, not a donation quilt, there would be some notations on that form that told me if the customer felt that the top or the backing was directional, so that I could make sure that I was loading them the same way. In this case, they're not directional. There's no piecing on the back at all. There's nothing that needs to be centered. Now let's talk about piecing on that backing as well real quick before I go and sew this down. If my customer's piece backing, okay, and there's one seam, it's 2 pieces of the same material sewn together. I typically do not center that seam for a couple reasons. The biggest one for me is that typically people will fold their quilts right in the center. And it's a weak point on the quilt because it's sewn. So I will typically load all the way to the top and then just sew down, and usually I end up with, a lot on one side and a little bit on the other. Conserves the most fabric for my customers. It's important to have a discussion with your customers if you're going to do that, though. My customers are now expecting that because I've been doing that for 11 years. When I first started out, I had some people that were very upset and thought that line should always be centered. It's really hard on a long arm to center something like that, because to be quite honest with you, if it's running this way, which is the way I want my seams to run, I'm blind by the time I get to the center of the quilt. I don't know where center is. So if you set your customers up to begin with to expect it not to be centered, if it happens to be centered, bonus for you. And if it's not centered, that's what they're expecting. Okay, so we have loosened our brake, so our long arm now wants to move. And I need to sew the quilt down. I have a couple options on how I can sew this down. And a lot of it is going to depend on how my quilt top looks to begin with. This particular quilt top is actually stay stitched 1/4 inch around, so it's not going to grow as I quilt across it. And it's very well pieced. I don't know who pieced it. It's a donation quilt for my guild, but whoever pieced this one does a lot of our piecing, and she's a very good piecer. So I can start at the center and quilt out in both directions. And if I have a quilt that I think is going to cause me problems, that's how I do it. If I've looked at that quilt and it's kind of rippling, when you look down here at the bottom of this quilt, it is laying flat. The batting's rippling, but the quilt itself is hanging flat. Yep. If it had borders on it and it was waving down there, we call it a friendly quilt. It's waving at you, right? At that point, I'm going to be going from the center out because the border is bigger than the center of the quilt if it's waving. So you want to look at your quilt and kind of decide what's going to be the easiest at that moment, how to load it. I'm not going to tell you there's a right and a wrong way to do anything. The more you get to know me, the more you're going to realize that that's true. Whatever is working for you in your studio at that moment is the right way to do it. And I kind of change what I'm doing depending on my quilt so that I can do whatever's easiest at that moment. In this case, this quilt's not going to pose any problems at all. It's straight and it's flat. You're not going to get very many quilts that are this flat. So I am going to actually start right here. I'm going to sew up, across, and down. You can only do that on a quilt that's well pieced, okay? Most of the time, I end up sewing either straight across and then up on both sides, or I end up going out and I still go up on both sides. That up on both sides helps me control extra fabric on the sides. We're going to talk about that as we forward this quilt, but this one's really nice and flat, so I'm just going to cheat and do it really quick. And I'm going to go between where her stay stitching is and the edge of the quilt, and it doesn't even matter if I'm completely straight. But I'm going to sew this down real quick. Now, I also want you to notice that I did this when I was sewing my batting down too, and I don't think I told you about this. I keep my left hand on the quilt. And just to warn you, I don't know if the video is going to flip. Sometimes it flips for us and sometimes it doesn't, depending on where it's being projected. But I am right-handed, so I am drawing the long arm with my right hand. My left hand, or my off hand, is down on the quilt, and I am holding down the edge of the quilt. Where does it sound? I'm putting pressure down. The reason I'm doing that is to give me just a little bit of resistance against my long arm. It helps me pull a straighter line. Okay, so I want you to watch. I don't know if you'll be able to see because I'm kind of crossed over from you, but this hand is going to stay down on the long arm, and I'm just going to kind of walk behind the long arm. Okay, when I get to this one, I'll pause for a second so I can reposition my feet, make sure everything has stayed flat. And the only time that I pull towards me on an edge of the quilt will be the 6 inches right here and the 6 inches on the bottom of the very final pass. The rest of the time, I like controlling my edges by going from belly bar to leveler. But I'm going to very quickly just stitch down this side because I'm here. And then I'm going to pull my thread up. So when I pull my thread up, I stopped my thread. I did a little back tack because I'm on the edge. I did needle up, pulled my machine 6 to 8 inches away. I'm going back to that same hole, and I'm going to do needle up, needle down. So on these new handles, white dot, and 6 to 8 inches away. This second movement away is giving me the length of my bobbin thread. Very important. If you are playing whack-a-mole, trying to get the bobbin thread up, when you pull it up the next time, you're not pulling it away far enough the second time you move 6 to 8 inches away. So I need to flatten everything out and making sure everything's smooth before I sew my sides down. So you can see the kind of extra material up here. There's a ripple. I don't want to pull on the edges of my quilt. If I pull on the edges of the quilt, I'm stretching the quilt. So I only want to pull on the center of my quilt. So I'm going to grab my batting and my quilt top and kind of pull back just a little bit. And I'll do it to within, a couple inches to the edge of the quilt. I now know that this line needs to be on the top of this roller. So I'm going to go work all the way across on this line, making sure that that stays straight. And notice I am smoothing out. I'm not smoothing towards the bottom of my quilt. The hardest thing for you to learn not to do is pull and tug the edges of your quilt because you want it to stay flat and you think that's helping you. What it's actually doing is adding extra material down to the bottom corner of your quilt. So you end up with straight quilt, straight quilt, straight quilt, so straight, 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 and a big old C curve on the bottom of your quilt. So the way that I prevent that is by never pulling the edge of my quilt. It took me years to get that habit out of my system. I do a lot of feeling the seam lines to see where they're hitting on my frame to make sure everything's smooth. If I've got extra material, like I do right here, right there, you can see a ripple going on here. I'm gonna keep that extra material where it lives. I mean, this isn't bad. Guys, that's not bad. Sometimes I have enough material I can pick it up off the surface of the quilt. But wherever that material is actually pieced into that quilt, I'm leaving it where it is. So I am going to needle up, needle down on the edge of my quilt, down next to my belly bar. Pull my machine away and pop my bottom thread up. Hold both of them, and then I'm going to needle down again. When I start the machine up, I'm going to go backwards, forwards, backwards to tack off just a little bit here. Backwards, forwards, backwards, and then I'm going to go away from me. As I'm going away from me, let me see if we can get the camera to get a shot of the bubble that's forming right here behind my foot. Okay, you see the bubble behind the foot? Look what happens when I push in front of my machine. Bubble behind the foot, it's flat. So you actually want to flatten that bubble out and just stitch down your quilt. I also did the back, forward, back at the, back tacked it at the top of the quilt. So it's completely sewn down. Then I'm going to do needle up, 6 to 8 inches away, back to the hole, needle down, needle up, 6 to 8 inches away, cut at the surface of the quilt. Now we need to do the left side. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing. Needle down, needle up. Move my machine away, pop the bobbin thread up, back to the hole, needle down, turn the machine on, away from me, towards me, away from me. The bubble is forming, push the bubble down. And then back tack here. And then I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to end the thread. The next row I do, I won't be ending the thread. When I do the back tack, I'll just leave it in the quilt top. And the reason is, I don't have to start it then. It's already sewn down. It's not gonna have do a thread nest on the back of the quilt, and I can just keep quilting because we're gonna be doing a pantograph from that side of the machine. Okay, the last thing you wanna do before you get back there, put your clamps on.